Thailand's tourism has taken a hit this year, with about 1.6 million fewer visitors compared to the same time last year. To help turn things around, the country rolled out a pretty generous campaign. They're giving away 200,000 free domestic flights to international tourists who visit between September and November 2025. Now, before you start booking your ticket to Thailand, let me break down what's really going on here because honestly, is this brilliant marketing or just throwing money at a problem? Stick around because we're diving deep into Thailand's latest tourism strategy, and trust me, it's more complicated than it looks. But first, let me ask you this. If someone offered you a free flight within Thailand, would that actually change where you go on vacation? Keep that question in mind, because by the end of this video, you might be surprised by the answer. All right, let's start with the basics. What exactly is Thailand offering here? So the Tourism Authority of Thailand just announced this massive initiative called Buy International, Free Thailand Domestic Flights. From September to November 2025, they're planning to give away 200,000 free round-trip domestic flights to foreign tourists. Here's how it works. You need to book an international flight to Thailand. The key part is it has to be a new booking, not one you already made. And then you get a free domestic round-trip ticket worth about 3,500 baht, which is roughly $100. They're partnering with 6 airlines. You even get a 20-kilo baggage allowance. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Well, hold on. Here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially problematic. These free flights aren't to the places you're probably thinking of. We're not talking about Phuket, Koh Samui, or Chiang Mai. Nope. The destinations are what Thailand calls secondary cities. We're talking about places like Phrae, Lampang, Nakhon Sawan, Trang, and Nakhon Si Thammarat. This is where the rubber meets the road with Thailand's strategy. They want to spread out tourism, reduce overcrowding in the popular spots, and boost these smaller provinces. I get it. It's a noble goal. But is a free $50 flight really going to make someone completely change their vacation plans? Let me put this in perspective with some numbers, because the math here is, well, it's something. Thailand is allocating 700 million baht. That's about 20 million US dollars for this program. They're expecting to generate 8.8 billion baht in tourism revenue from it. So for every dollar they spend, they expect to get back about $12. That sounds amazing on paper, right? But here's the thing, and this is where my skepticism kicks in. A lot of people who will use these free flights probably would have bought domestic flights anyway. This isn't necessarily creating new tourists. It's just subsidizing existing ones. Think about it this way. If you're already spending, say, $1,500 on a trip to Thailand, is saving $50 on a domestic flight really going to be the deciding factor in where you go or how much you spend? Probably not. Now, let's talk about who this actually appeals to. And I'll be honest here. This feels like it's targeting budget travelers, not the quality tourists that Thailand always says it wants to attract. When I was 20, backpacking around Southeast Asia with like $30 a day, hell yeah, I would have jumped on this. Free flight? Sign me up. I'd figure out what to do in Trang when I got there. But now, if I'm already dropping serious money on an international flight and a nice hotel, the cost of a domestic flight is basically a rounding error. This is the fundamental tension in Thailand's tourism strategy. They want high-spending tourists, but then they create programs that mainly appeal to budget travelers. It's like trying to attract luxury car buyers by offering free floor mats. And here's another wrinkle. Some of these secondary cities might not even be ready for a tourism boom. The Thai Hotels Association in the Northeast region has already raised concerns about this. They're worried that places like Buriram and Ubon Ratchathani won't benefit much, because frankly, they don't have the infrastructure or attractions to handle a sudden influx of tourists. I mean, some of these provinces might not even have functional airports that can handle increased traffic. And even if they do, what happens when a bunch of tourists show up expecting Instagram-worthy experiences and find, well, maybe not that? This is the classic, if you build it, they will come fallacy, except they're not even building it. They're just offering free transportation to places that might not be ready for visitors. Let me share some context about Thailand's tourism situation right now, because this campaign isn't happening in a vacuum. As of August 2025, Thailand has welcomed 20.8 million foreign tourists, which is actually down 7% from the previous year. That's concerning for a country where tourism is such a massive part of the economy. China, their biggest market, has sent 2.9 million visitors, but that's still way below pre-pandemic levels. So Thailand is clearly feeling pressure to boost those numbers, and this free flight program is basically a Hail Mary to get tourists to places they normally wouldn't go. The timing is also interesting. They're running this from September to November 2025, which lines up with the post-monsoon period when weather is generally good, but before the peak high season crowds arrive. From a logistics standpoint, this makes sense. Airlines have more capacity, hotels have more rooms available, and destinations aren't overcrowded. If you're going to experiment with redirecting tourists, this is probably the right time to do it. The problem with giveaways like this is that they often attract exactly the wrong kind of attention. You get people who are primarily motivated by the freebie, not by genuine interest in the destination. These aren't necessarily the tourists who are going to fall in love with Trang and come back next year, or recommend it to their friends. I think it's a decent idea, but not a game changer. It'll probably succeed in the short term by pushing more tourists into secondary cities and bumping up the overall numbers. But whether it leads to real, long-term tourism growth in those areas, that's still up in the air. The real test will be what happens after November 2025. Do these secondary cities see continued growth in tourism, or do visitor numbers drop back once the free flights end? My prediction? You'll see a temporary spike in domestic flights and tourism to these areas, followed by a gradual decline unless Thailand makes much bigger investments in infrastructure and destination development. But here's what I find most interesting about this whole thing. It shows that Thailand is willing to experiment and take risks with its tourism strategy. A lot of destinations just stick with what works, even if it's causing problems like overcrowding or environmental damage. Thailand is at least trying to be proactive about redirecting tourist flows and developing new destinations. That's commendable, even if this particular approach might not be the most effective. Sometimes you have to try things to learn what works and what doesn't. You know, the more I think about it, this whole free flight thing kind of sums up the crossroads Thailand's tourism is at right now. On one hand, they're trying something bold, which I respect. It's not easy to shift habits or get people to explore outside the usual Phuket-Bangkok-Chiang Mai loop. But on the other hand, it feels like they're handing out airline tickets and hoping the rest just magically works itself out. Tourists aren't exactly going to post about that on Instagram. Still, maybe that's the point. Maybe this is about planting seeds. Even if just 10% of those visitors walk away with a great experience, maybe they'll come back or spread the word. All right, let me know what you think in the comments. Would a free domestic flight influence your travel plans? Have you been to any of these secondary cities in Thailand? What would it take to get you to choose Trang over Phuket? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.